As I record this, Ontario is on fire. More than 180 fires are burning. First Nation communities have been evacuated, and Toronto just had the worst air quality of any major city on earth. To be fair, nationally, this is not a record year, it is sharp regional flare up. But the smoke crossed the border. And this month, the United States Congress sent Canada a letter: thin the forest, clear the fuel, burn it back. Simply manage the forest better. Canada's Prime Minister answered that climate change is everyone's responsibility, including United States. So one side says rake the forest, other says it's the climate. Both are pointing at the forest floor, and almost no one is naming what dried the forest out in the first place. Two questions today. One, who is really to blame for these fires and for stopping the next one? Two, is Canada carbon price even enough to cut the emissions behind the fire, or at least to pay to protect these forests? I am Vaibhav, 12 years in carbon markets including forest carbon, and let me show you the numbers. Sort the suspects into two piles: what lights the fire and what just fails to put it out. The cause is climate change, and it deserves more than a wave. A fire is natural, conditions are not. Canada is warming at twice global average. It's not nearly three times. A hotter, drier atmosphere pulls the moisture from the trees and primes them to explode. And the science now names. A 2023 study traced more than a third of area burned across Western North America since 1986 to the emissions of just 88 companies, the world's biggest producers of oil, gas, and cement. This is the cause, everything else is what happens after. Now you can't build the atmosphere. Emissions are global. Every country that burns fossil fuels owns a slice. Canada advancing a new oil pipeline, even as its forest burn included. One fact for the record: the framework built to share this, the Paris Agreement, now has one major player, the United States, standing outside it. One country's carbon price is carrying a global problem alone. So that is the cost. The symptoms are how we fail to deal with it. Start with an accounting trick. Canada does not count most of its wildfires. It files them as natural disturbance outside the target it measures itself against. In 2023, the fire on managed land put out roughly 1.1 billion tons. The entire economy of Canada, dust report, was 694 million. The part they leave out was bigger than the whole country they count. Then there is money that is simply gone. A $3.2 billion tree planting program cancelled last year after planting about a tenth of what it promised. And then carbon price, where we spend most of today. Because two things protect a forest: the backbone, public money, and accountability, firefighters, fuel crews, that cancelled program. And a compliment, the carbon market paying landowners to do the right thing. The backbone is the government's job, the market only tops it up. So before we blame the market, is the compliment even working? Let's follow the money. Here is a forest carbon credit in plain terms. You own a forest you would normally log. Instead, you change the plan, cut later, or do not cut at all, and then you are paid in credits for the carbon kept in the trees against a baseline of what you supposedly would have done. That baseline is where it went wrong for years. The old rules let projects claim a worst case: I was going to clear cut everything and get paid against a threat they would never carry out. In California, that style of static baseline overcredited by about 30 million tons paper, not carbon. To be fair, the market is fixing it. The newest method throws out the gameable baseline, remeasures against real forest data, docks credit for leakage, and enlarges the fire insurances buffer. Real reforms. But here is the pivot: make the credit perfectly honest and still just pays you to cut later or not at all. It does nothing to stop a fire. A managed forest still burns, and peer-reviewed work last year found the buffer pool under insures that loss in about three quarters of climate scenarios. What actually makes a forest survive is fire, not paperwork. It's physical work, thinning, clearing fuel, prescribed and cultural burning. Cost around $2,000 an acre again and again. Could carbon pay for it? The carbon you protect on that acre is worth, rough math, about $700 at a $20 price and $4,000 at $115 price. And even fully funded thinning does not cool the planet drying the forest, it just buys time. Whether you can afford even that comes down to one number. Ask what Canada's carbon price is and you will get a number, $95 a ton. Here is what almost nobody explains. That is not a price, it's a promise. Canada prices carbon like a federation. Every province can build its own system. Over all of them sits Ottawa's benchmark. The backstop hits at least this bar, a bar that was built to rise $15 a year, or the federal system snaps in. Now watch what a ton actually cost underneath the promise, starting where the fire is. In Ontario, Ontario runs its own system, output based, emit 100 tons, 90 are free. You pay on the 10 above the line, and the Ontario's own posted price for an access ton right now is $95. Pay the full rate on 10 tons, spread it over all 100, about $9.50 a ton on average. The margin still bites at full price, the free allowance is just a rebate. So Ontario actually holds closest to the promise, but here is the Ontario detail that should stop you. Offsets are not eligible. A forest project cannot sell a single credit into the compliance system of the province that is burning, no door. Alberta output based and it does take offsets. The credit bank holds about 3 years worth of demand, performance credits and offsets together. Companies can pay 90% of their bill in credit, so the market price rules. Last August about $24.50. And Alberta had already frozen its fund price at 95, holding it flat while the bar was built to climb. The New Deal locked that freeze in. Quebec cap and trade with California price set at auction, and this made it clear near the floor just under $40. BC a straight charge at the benchmark rate, credits capped at 30%, also holding at the bar. 4 provinces, 4 machines, one finding almost nowhere does a ton actually clear at the bar. Their promise was already leaking. And here is where it turns. Ottawa had promised to review the benchmark by 2026 to check that stringency still held across every system. Then late last year, Ottawa and Alberta struck a deal. The promise 170 by 2030 became 115, reaching 140 only by 2040, a decade late. Traded under a trade war for a pipeline and a carbon capture project. In today's money, that peak is worth roughly 60% less. And the review, Ottawa's own note this May says the updated benchmark due later this year will carry the new lower path. The checkup that was supposed to test the promise will publish the weaker one. The floors were sagging. The answer was not to tighten the promise, it was to lower it. So run the test at that case. Is it enough for carbon capture? The escape hatch this bargain leans on? Break even is reckoned around 130 to 150, an estimate, hold it loosely. Ottawa's own tell to get the first project moving, it had to guarantee 8650 for 15 years. A promise on top of a promise, no. Is it enough at least for fire management? $2,000 of work per acre against roughly $700 of carbon value out west, and in Ontario's compliance market, no buyer at any price. No. Too weak to cut, too weak to capture, too weak to protect. So the real challenge is sharper than any blame game. The province with the fire has a carbon market with no door for the forest, and the country has a price too weak to build one. Can a carbon market pay to prevent fires? It already does, just not here in Canada. In northern Australia, indigenous rangers are paid in carbon credits for controlled early season burning, cool fires that prevent the catastrophic late season fires. Not a pilot, 86 projects, 35 million hectares covered. 7 in 10 projects indigenous operated, over $50 million a year to indigenous organization, and in the flagship region, the destructive late season fires have measurably declined. One honest caveat: savanna credits come from avoided methane in grass fires. Different forests, different chemistry, so the method does not copy paste to the boreal. The lesson does: a purpose built method, indigenous stewardship, and a price that pays for the work. And here is the sting: Canada is not missing these pieces. A forest carbon protocol published, but it covers private land management, not a fire risk reduction, and Ontario will not take forest credit at all. Indigenous fire stewardship, it also exists: guardian programs, cultural burnings, but on grants, not credit revenue that scales. A carbon price? We just spent 3 minutes inside it, fragmented, looted, and diluted. Three frameworks, three gaps. Canada is not missing the pieces, it is missing the connections. So, the verdict: who is to blame? Not the fire is natural. The cause is what dried it out: fossil fuel emissions, warming the country at twice the global rate. Everything else, the accounting dodge, the cancelled tree program, the diluted routes, is how we fail to deal with a fire we helped load. Is the price enough? No. Too weak to cut emission, too weak to fund the capture that justifies the bargain. Too weak to pay for a fire crew. But I will not join the pile on. Canada diluted the price under real pressure: a hostile trade partner, an economy to keep moving, and it's not Canada's failing alone. The smoke does not treat the border, and neither does atmosphere. Both countries in that angry exchange are fossil fuel economies arguing about forest role while the thing that dried it out goes unnamed. That is what happens when a global cost meets a one country price, with the shared framework short a major player. The raking, the thinning, the firefighting that manages the symptom, the one lever aimed at costs is the carbon price. Canada has every framework it needs: the protocol, the stewardship, the price. What does not have yet is the connections between them. Australia connected the three, and its rangers are paid to stop fires before they start. The smoke crossed the borders, so does the responsibility, and so does the fix. One disclosure: at Climate Decode, we advise on carbon strategy and forest carbon due diligence. This is the world I work on in every day. The 2 minute version of your operation route finder is linked below. See you next week.